4 days, 100 hours. That was the pitch made to world leaders.
Right, 100 hours.
The United States and Israel were, supposedly going to execute this precision 100-hour military operation to just permanently neutralize the threat from Iran.
Yeah, it was supposed to be clean, surgical, and overwhelmingly decisive.
Exactly. But instead, we're now looking at a region where allied economies are facing, and this is wild, 14% GDP contractions.
Mm-hmm.
Global shipping is basically being held hostage by this deeply calculating, smart blockade, and the U.S. military is quietly stripping essential missile defenses from its allies in Irja just to, keep up with the rate of incoming fire.
It is the absolute definition of a strategic quagmire. The gap between the spreadsheet projections of this conflict and the messy, chaotic reality on the ground is, well, it's turning into a geopolitical chasm.
It really is. So welcome to this deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us because today we are taking a magnifying glass to one of the most complex, fast-moving, and frankly dangerous geopolitical crises of our time.
Definitely.
We're going to unpack this ongoing, highly volatile war involving the United States under the Trump administration, a highly mobilized Israel, and an Iran that is absorbing massive blows, but fighting an entirely different kind of war than the West planned for.
And we're doing this by looking at some incredibly revealing analysis that just cuts straight through the daily noise.
Exactly. Our entire deep dive today is grounded in a detailed interview transcript from the Mario Nawfal show, featuring the geopolitical analyst Trita Parsi.
Right, which is a fantastic source for this.
It is. So our mission today is to peel back the dominant media narratives you might be seeing on your feeds, and look at the actual strategic, economic, and political mechanics driving this conflict.
Because there's a lot going on beneath the surface.
There is. Now, before we jump in, I need to be crystal clear with you. This source material contains highly politically charged content.
Yeah, we're talking about multiple nations, controversial leaders.
Intense military actions, devastating global consequences. So I want to state explicitly right up front, we are not taking sides.
None at all.
We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints, military actions, or political strategies discussed here. Our job today is strictly to act as your guides, impartially unpacking the analysis and facts presented in this specific source document.
Right. So you can understand the mechanics of what is actually being reported. We're here to look at the incentives, the military doctrines, the economic levers as they're laid out in the analysis.
Exactly. Nothing more, nothing less. So let's start right at the beginning with this staggering disconnect between the architects of the war and, well, the reality of the war.
The 100-hour illusion.
Yeah. The source material reveals that the original U.S. and Israeli plan was pitched to regional leaders in the Middle East as a 100-hour war. When I first read that, I had to pause.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
Right. Because a 100-hour war implies a level of dominance that borders on science fiction. It basically assumes the enemy will just fold immediately.
Well, it demonstrates a fascinating level of historical hubris. The concept of a 100-hour war heavily echoes the ground offensive of Operation Desert Storm back in 1991.
Oh, right, where the U.S.-led coalition just decimated the Iraqi army.
Exactly, in roughly 100 hours. So the architects of this current conflict seemingly pitched a similar scenario to their regional allies, like, give us 4 days, we'll shock and awe the system, degrade their capabilities, and the threat is neutralized.
But the geography, the military structure, the very nature of the adversary here is completely different from Iraq in 1991.
Completely different.
And the reality totally reflects that. We are well past the 100-hour mark. There has been absolutely no strategic shift. And the situation is just bogging down rapidly.
And you can see the panic setting in diplomatically.
Yeah, look at Trump right now. He is actively struggling to get allies to join a naval mission to keep the strategic straits open.
And we really have to ask why those allies are hesitating. Because it's not simply a lack of military capability on their part.
Right, they have boats.
They do. But the analysis points out that many of these countries were actively warning the U.S. and Israel beforehand. They warned about the exact dangers of initiating a conflict this way. They warned about the catastrophic cost to the global economy, and they were largely ignored.
And now they're essentially being demanded to join a maritime coalition to clean up a mess they advised against in the first place.
Exactly. You wouldn't want to join that either.
No, absolutely not. They're refusing to join because they do not see an exit plan. They don't see how the U.S. administration plans to get itself out of this situation without dragging them all down with it.
But, and this is key, if you turn on the mainstream news, there is a very different narrative playing out.
Oh, yeah. The reports heavily suggest Iran is taking massive hits, that they're losing on every front, and that their military infrastructure is just being systematically dismantled.
And this is where the analysis provides a crucial counter-narrative, relying on actions rather than just press releases. The analyst reveals something that runs completely contrary to the idea of an overwhelming Western victory. It was actually Israel that requested, or at least strongly signaled, they were open to a ceasefire very early on in the conflict.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
The side that is ostensibly launching these massive high-tech strikes and, winning the tactical battles was the one exploring a ceasefire.
That's what the source indicates.
That seems incredibly counterintuitive. Why hasn't this been front-page news everywhere?
Well, the source notes that this fact has been largely obscured by heavy Israeli military censorship.
Oh, of course.
Right, which strictly controls the flow of information regarding military setbacks or any sort of strategic vulnerability. But the very fact that Israel was looking for an off-ramp early on tells you everything you need to know about the vital difference between a tactical victory and a strategic victory.
Okay, let's break that down. Because if you're listening and wondering why a superpower and a highly advanced regional military are struggling against Iran, this distinction is like the golden key.
It really is.
Tactical versus strategic victory. How does the analysis actually define the difference here?
So a tactical victory is a measurable, localized success. It's the kind of thing that produces excellent video footage for a press briefing.
Like blowing something up.
Exactly. It's sinking a fast attack boat. It's bombing a radar installation. It's taking out a specific missile silo or, assassinating a mid-level commander. You could point to the map and say, we destroyed X amount of enemy assets today.
Okay, that sounds like winning. I mean, if you blow up all their stuff, aren't you winning the war?
Not necessarily. And that is the trap of tactical thinking. A strategic victory means you have fundamentally altered your opponent's core operational capacity to continue fighting. Or, you've forced them to change their political behavior.
Right.
If you sink 50 boats and bomb 20 installations, but the opponent's military machine is specifically designed to absorb exactly that level of damage and keep functioning.
And you haven't actually stopped them.
You've achieved zero strategic victory. You're just burning millions of dollars of ordnance to prune the leaves off a tree with incredibly deep roots.
And the source points out that Iran has spent the last 30 years growing those exact roots.
Decades of preparation.
Their entire defense architecture is organized around one paranoid overriding expectation: a massive, overwhelming U.S. invasion coming from the south.
Exactly. I mean, they haven't been building a military to project power across the globe or to win a conventional force-on-force tank battle on an open plain.
Like in WWII or something.
Right. For 3 decades, every bunker they dug, every subterranean tunnel network they carved into the mountains, every decentralized command structure they implemented, it was designed specifically for this exact scenario.
Explain that decentralized command structure, because that feels crucial to understanding why the 100-hour knockout failed so badly.
Yeah, in military terms, it's often referred to as a mosaic defense.
Mosaic defense, okay.
In a traditional hierarchical military, if you cut off the head, like if you bomb the Central Command headquarters in the capital, the whole army is paralyzed.
Because they don't know what to do without orders.
Exactly. The orders stop flowing. Iran realized years ago they could never protect their Central Command from U.S. air superiority. So they designed their Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, to operate as semi-autonomous cells.
Wow.
So if the capital goes dark, if communications are jammed, local commanders already have their standing orders. They have their own stockpiles, their own launchers, and the authority to keep fighting indefinitely without needing a central signal.
So it's like coming into a boxing match expecting a quick, clean knockout. The U.S. and Israel step into the ring, and the first 30 seconds, they throw their absolute heaviest haymakers.
And they land perfectly.
Right. They land perfectly. They expect the opponent to just fold. But what they didn't realize is that the opponent hasn't been training to hit back with a stronger punch. The opponent has spent 30 years training their body specifically to absorb those exact blows.
That's a great analogy.
They've thickened their skull, padded their ribs, and their only goal is to turn the fight into a grueling, bloody, 15-round endurance test.
And that is precisely what is happening.
Right.
The 100-hour knockout failed to paralyze that mosaic defense. And now, the architects of this war find themselves in round 5 of a brutal endurance test they frankly never prepared to fight.
Which naturally leads to the most important question of this entire conflict. If the quick knockout failed, and we are now trapped in this grueling endurance test, Who is actually feeling the pain of this prolonged fight the most?
Because someone has to break eventually.
Right. In a 15-round fight, someone's legs are going to give out first.
And that brings us to the invisible dynamic governing every single decision being made right now. The concept of the ticking clock.
The ticking clock.
The combatants in this war are operating on entirely different timelines, and the economic toll is dictating those timelines in ways that missiles never could.
Let's look at who is running out of time the fastest. Because if the bombs aren't stopping the Iranian military, they are absolutely detonating the region's wallet.
Big time.
The entities with the shortest fuse, the ones bleeding out the quickest, aren't necessarily the ones taking the physical bombs. According to the analysis, it's the Asian markets, and the Gulf Cooperation Council states the GCC.
The economic collateral damage here is not some hypothetical future event. It is happening right now, and the scale is just staggering.
I want to read some of the numbers the source pulled from Goldman Sachs regarding GDP contraction estimates in the Gulf. Listen to this.
Yeah, these are wild.
Qatar is facing a 14% contraction of their GDP. Kuwait, a 14% contraction. The United Arab Emirates, down 5%. Saudi Arabia, down 3%.
And remember, those are the official estimates.
Right. The analyst notes that people inside these governments, like the technocrats looking at the real-time data, are whispering that these are actually conservative estimates.
We really need to unpack what a 14% GDP contraction actually looks like, mechanically, on the ground.
Yeah, because we're so used to hearing about 1 or 2% fluctuations in Western economies, where a 2% drop is like a severe recession.
Exactly. A 14% drop is an economic catastrophic event. It alters the trajectory of a nation for a generation.
But how does a war next door instantly wipe out 14% of Qatar or Kuwait's economy? What is the actual mechanism causing that?
It comes down to the nature of the Gulf economies. They are heavily, sometimes entirely reliant on the unimpeded maritime export of hydrocarbons, oil, and liquefied natural gas.
Right.
And they also rely on massive influxes of foreign direct investment for their mega projects. When a hot war erupts in the Persian Gulf, maritime insurance rates for commercial vessels absolutely skyrocket.
The war risk premiums?
Yes. Very quickly, it becomes economically unviable to send a massive tanker into the Gulf. So the ships just stop coming.
So the oil and gas literally just sit in the ports. They can't sell it.
Exactly. The revenue stream halts.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, foreign investors look at the region, they see missiles flying over Dubai or Riyadh, and they pull their capital out.
Capital flight.
Massive capital flight. Construction halts on infrastructure projects. And these governments, which operate as rentier states.
Meaning they provide extensive welfare, zero taxes, high-paying public jobs to their citizens in exchange for political compliance, right?
Exactly. They suddenly find their coffers drying up. They literally cannot pay the rent.
And when a rentier state can't pay the rent, the social contract breaks.
Precisely. You get soaring inflation for basic imported goods, rising unemployment, and a fundamental destabilization of the society. The Gulf states derive their ultimate national security not from their armies, but from their immense economic stability.
Wow.
So when you threaten their GDP on that scale, you are threatening the survival of their ruling families. They do not have time. Their clock is practically at zero.
Okay, so the Gulf and Asian markets are the primary losers of time here. Who has the luxury of letting the clock tick? Who is the winner of time?
The analysis suggests that Israel currently has the most time. From their strategic viewpoint, they're willing to endure significant domestic disruption, even living in bunkers for extended periods, as long as the United States remains actively engaged in the war.
As long as the U.S. is bearing the brunt of the broader geopolitical and financial costs.
Right.
But why are they willing to tolerate that? Living in bunkers doesn't sound sustainable.
But because their overarching goal is the systematic degradation of Iran's industrial and military base. And you just cannot achieve that in 100 hours.
Right. It takes a long time.
It takes months, perhaps years, of sustained bombing to roll back 30 years of military infrastructure. As long as the U.S. is providing the diplomatic cover and the military bulk, Israel is content to let the endurance test drag on. They are willing to spend the time.
But wait, this doesn't make sense to me. The United States has an essentially unlimited military budget. They have aircraft carriers. They have a global logistical network. How can the U.S. clock be ticking faster than a country like Iran, which is actively being bombed and sanctioned into the ground?
This is the ultimate paradox of superpower vulnerability.
Yeah.
The United States' time frame is not constrained by its military might.
Oh, interesting.
It's not like they're suddenly going to run out of fighter jets or naval destroyers. The constraint is entirely domestic and political.
So it's not about running out of bullets, it's about running out of voters.
Precisely.
Yeah.
For the United States, this is an elective conflict. The survival of the American Republic is not at stake.
Right. If the U.S. withdraws its naval assets from the Persian Gulf tomorrow, Washington, D.C. does not fall.
Exactly. Therefore, the pain tolerance of the American public is incredibly low.
Yeah, an American voter isn't going to tolerate paying $6 a gallon for gas or dealing with massive supply chain inflation just to maintain some geopolitical posture in the Middle East.
They absolutely won't. The political and economic fallout of a prolonged, messy, expensive war will very quickly threaten the Trump presidency and the Republican Party's broader election prospects.
Because it hits the wallet.
Right. The analysis explicitly states that Trump's primary goal isn't necessarily achieving a total unconditional military victory over Iran.
Really?
His primary goal is avoiding a quagmire that ruins the support of his domestic base. If his voters turn against the war because they feel the pain at the supermarket and the gas pump, his timeline to wage this war evaporates overnight.
But the source also highlights that the U.S. isn't just facing political constraints. They are actually facing a terrifying, hard military constraint, ammunition depletion.
Yes.
And the example the analyst uses to prove this is absolutely wild.
The situation with the THAAD missile batteries. This is one of the most revealing indicators of the hidden stress on the U.S. military.
Yeah, for context, THAAD stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. It is one of the most advanced, expensive, and capable anti-ballistic missile defense systems on the planet.
It's a massive deal.
And the U.S. took the huge political and strategic risk of pulling THAAD batteries out of South Korea to move them to the Middle East.
We really need to understand the gravity of that move. Putting those THAAD systems into South Korea in the first place, back around 2016 and 2017, was a geopolitical nightmare.
Why? Why did it cause such a fuss?
Because a THAAD system isn't just a missile launcher. It comes with an incredibly powerful X-band radar, the anti-PY2 radar.
Okay.
This radar is so powerful it can peer deep into Chinese airspace. China absolutely hated it. They viewed it as a U.S. spy tool placed right on their doorstep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they launched massive economic retaliation against South Korea for hosting it. Plus, North Korea obviously viewed it as an existential threat to their nuclear deterrent.
So the U.S. went through years of agonizing diplomatic pain, infuriated a superpower rival in China, and heavily pressured a vital ally in South Korea, all to get this vital defense shield installed in the Pacific.
Yes, and to suddenly yank those systems out of South Korea now, leaving a crucial ally exposed to the North Korean threat, just to cover vulnerabilities in the Middle East. It signals sheer desperation.
It's a blinking red light.
It's indicating that the infinite resources of the U.S. military are a myth when stretched across multiple global flashpoints simultaneously.
And it comes down to the brutal math of asymmetrical warfare, right?
Yeah.
The U.S. is firing incredibly sophisticated interceptors that cost millions of dollars apiece.
Millions. While Iran is firing mass-produced low-tech drones and ballistic missiles that cost a fraction of that. The cost exchange ratio is entirely in Iran's favor.
It's just unsustainable.
The analyst points out a staggering statistic. Despite the thousands of bombs the U.S. and Israel have dropped, Iran seems to consistently maintain a baseline of around 100 active launchers.
Wow.
As fast as the U.S. destroys a launcher, Iran pulls another one out of a subterranean bunker or retrofits a commercial truck.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. I hear what the analysis is saying about the U.S. political clock ticking and the ammunition match being really bad, but Iran is taking huge economic hits.
They are.
Their infrastructure is being pummeled. The transcript acknowledges this will set them back economically for years. How on earth can their timeline be longer than the United States?
It's an excellent question, and the answer lies in the fundamental difference between an elective war and an existential war.
Elective versus existential. Let's dig into that.
Well, we established that for the U.S., this is elective. But for the Iranian regime, this is a fight for absolute survival. It is existential.
Right.
If they lose this war, the regime falls. The leadership is likely killed, imprisoned, or exiled. The entire structure of their society, built over 40 years, is dismantled.
When you put it that way, the pain tolerance calculation changes completely.
Exponentially. When a state, and specifically the individuals running that state, is fighting for its very existence, it is willing to accept almost infinite economic devastation.
Because what's the alternative?
Exactly. They will accept widespread infrastructure damage and immense civilian suffering because the alternative is their own annihilation.
Yeah.
You simply cannot out-endorse someone fighting for their life when you are only fighting for geopolitical leverage and poll numbers.
Wow. So Iran is willing to bleed longer than the U.S. is willing to pay for the bandages?
That's a great way to put it.
That is a chilling dynamic. So having established that Iran has this higher pain tolerance and that they know the U.S. clock is ticking, how are they actually using that time? Because they aren't just sitting in bunkers waiting for the U.S. public to get tired.
Not at all. They are actively weaponizing the global economy's lack of time. They are squeezing the ticking clock to make it tick faster.
Right.
And they're doing it using their ultimate geographic leverage, the Strait of Hormuz.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating tactical maneuvers discussed in the source.
Sure.
The smart blockade.
This is really clever.
For decades, the ultimate boogeyman in Middle Eastern geopolitics has been the threat that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz, the incredibly narrow waterway where roughly 20 to 30% of the world's oil consumption passes through daily.
Right. The assumption was always binary. Either the strait is open or Iran completely mines it and shuts it down, triggering a global economic meltdown.
But the source reveals they haven't fully closed it. They're doing something much more devious and, frankly, much more sophisticated. They've implemented a smart closing.
Yeah.
How exactly does a smart closing work?
It's a brilliant piece of asymmetrical economic warfare. If they fully mined the strait and blocked every single ship, they would commit what the analyst calls the suicide option.
Because everyone would turn on them.
Exactly. They would instantly unite the entire world against them.
Yep.
China, Russia, India, everyone would be furious, and Iran would face a unified global coalition.
Yeah.
But they didn't do that.
Instead, they are selectively allowing ships through. The analysis notes that ships originating from or destined for China, India, Pakistan, and Russia are being granted free, unmolested passage.
Think about the geopolitical wedge that drives into the international community. They are essentially communicating to the non-Western world, we have no problem with you, your economies are safe, business as usual.
Wow.
They're isolating the pain to a very specific target group.
But for the Western nations, or nations closely allied with the U.S. military posture, it is a completely different story. The source points out that these other nations are being forced to pay or to negotiate directly with Tehran.
This is where the bouncer analogy you mentioned earlier is just so apt.
Exactly. It feels exactly like a velvet rope at an extremely exclusive nightclub. Iran is playing the bouncer. They aren't burning the club down. That would ruin the party for everyone and get them arrested.
Right.
They are just standing at the door dictating who gets on the VIP list for free, China, Russia, and who has to pay an exorbitant cover charge or beg to get in Europe and the West.
And how do they enforce this velvet rope on the open ocean? I mean, they don't have to physically board every British or American-linked vessel. They just have to signal that those vessels are targets.
Just the threat is enough.
Right. Once they do that, the maritime insurance companies in London or New York refuse to underwrite the cargo. If an oil tanker carrying $100 million of crude can't get insurance, the owners simply will not let it sail into the strait.
The liability is too huge.
Exactly. The threat of violence creates a bureaucratic and economic blockade that is just as effective as a physical one.
And the diplomatic humiliation for the West is staggering. The transcript explicitly notes that France and Germany actually sent emissaries to Tehran to secure free passage for their ships.
Think about that for a second.
They didn't go to Washington, D.C. to ask the U.S. Navy to escort them and protect them. They bypassed the global superpower and went straight to the bouncer to negotiate.
That is a massive blow to U.S. prestige and its post-WWII role as the guarantor of global maritime security. By forcing European powers to negotiate with Tehran, Iran is forcing the international community to recognize its sovereignty and its absolute, undeniable leverage over this economic choke point.
They are actively fragmenting U.S. alliances in real time.
They really are.
But wait, why doesn't the U.S. just fly its stealth bombers over the strait and dare Iran to do something?
Because, and the transcript shockingly notes this, the U.S. does not have full air superiority over the Strait of Hormuz.
How is that possible? I mean, the U.S. spends nearly $1 trillion a year on defense.
Well, they have air superiority over western and southern Iran, where they've degraded the air defense networks. But the geography of the strait is incredibly narrow, flanked by jagged mountainous terrain on the Iranian side.
Right.
These mountains are honeycombed with anti-ship missile batteries and mobile air defense systems that can, pop out of a tunnel, fire, and disappear in seconds.
That's terrifying.
The U.S. military is in an incredibly vulnerable position, trying to police a claustrophobic waterway where they do not control the sky or the shoreline.
So if you're the U.S. military, how do you respond to an adversary that is essentially taxing global trade right under your nose? If you can't control the sky, why not just send in minesweepers and dismantle the blockade forcefully?
Because Iran has anticipated that exact escalation. That's why the analyst highlights these persistent, incredibly tense rumors that Iran has dropped 10 to 12 sea mines into the strait.
The source couldn't fully confirm it, but the analyst said it was a highly plausible, calculated warning.
Exactly. It's highly symbolic deterrence. I mean, dropping a dozen mines into a massive waterway does not physically close the strait. Most ships will still pass through fine.
Right.
But it sends a crystal clear, terrifying message to the U.S. Navy. We have laid the groundwork. If you try to violently dismantle our smart blockade, or if you launch an amphibious assault, we will drop 1,000 mines.
We will trigger the suicide option.
Yes. And we will take the global economy down with us. It is deterrence through the threat of mutual economic destruction.
And while they are playing bouncer at the strait, holding a gun to the global economy's head, they are still aggressively striking out militarily. The numbers in the source regarding Iran's daily strike capacity are unbelievable.
Yeah, they really push back against the standard media narrative.
Right, especially considering the prevailing narrative that their military has been degraded. Listen to this strike data from the analysis. The UAE has been hit with 319 missiles and 1,627 drones.
Unbelievable.
Israel has been hit with 310 missiles and 530 drones. Kuwait hit with 243 missiles and 477 drones.
Those numbers absolutely destroy the illusion of a successful 100-hour war. They demonstrate an industrial-scale capacity for asymmetrical warfare that remains largely intact.
Yeah, you don't absorb thousands of drone strikes from an enemy whose operational capacity has been fundamentally broken.
You just don't. The Iranian strategy is brutally clear. Inflict enough sustained, distributed pain on the region so that every single nation concludes that starting this war was a catastrophic mistake and that restarting it in the future is unthinkable.
So the U.S. naval strategy is stymied by the smart blockade and the threat of sea mines. The air campaign isn't stopping the decentralized drone swarms. The geopolitical allies are fracturing and going to Tehran to negotiate.
Right.
What does a superpower do when Plan A of overwhelming military dominance fails?
They resort to the darker arts of statecraft. If you cannot break the body of the military, you try to cut off the head of the state, you attempt to trigger an internal collapse.
Which takes us to the strategy of decapitation strikes and what the analyst calls the off-ramp paradox.
Right.
Because the U.S. cannot break the naval blockade, they are falling back on trying to force the regime to collapse from the top down through targeted assassinations.
The analyst refers to this current wave of assassinations as a second bite at the apple.
Meaning what, exactly?
The implication is that a previous major assassinations attempt, perhaps targeting a key military or political figure early in the conflict, failed to trigger the implosion of the regime they hoped for.
Oh.
So the revised strategy seems to be just keep killing leaders, hoping that eventually the structural integrity of the government crumbles.
And the source highlights a very specific, critical target of this campaign, Ali Larijani. The transcript notes that his son is confirmed dead from a strike, and Larijani's own status is currently unknown.
Yes, Larijani is a very significant figure here.
There's also a ton of wild speculation swirling about the supreme leader himself. Is he alive? Is he functioning? The source mentions rumors of him having surgery in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
There was even a bizarre New York Post rumor, which apparently made Donald Trump laugh, that the supreme leader was sidelined by the military because of his sexuality.
The analyst very quickly and rightly filters out that tabloid noise.
Yeah.
Disinformation thrives in the fog of war. What is actually relevant is the operational reality on the ground, regardless of the supreme leader's health status.
Right. The source makes it emphatically clear. The supreme leader's day-to-day physical presence, or lack thereof, is practically irrelevant to the current defense strategy.
Totally relevant.
The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, runs the war, and de facto runs the country right now.
Because of that mosaic defense structure we discussed earlier, the military machine is designed to keep grinding forward, even if the figurehead is removed or incapacitated.
But let's go back to Ali Larijani, because this is where the analysis reveals a massive, almost unbelievable strategic paradox. You called it the off-ramp paradox.
Yes, and this is perhaps one of the most vital insights from the entire interview regarding how wars actually end. Ali Larijani is not just another faceless hardliner in the regime.
Right.
He is a known quantity to the West. Historically, he is viewed as a pragmatist. He is a consensus maker within the highly factionalized, complex Iranian political system.
Okay, so he's a guy who can navigate the internal politics?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He understands how to navigate the hardliners in the IRGC, the moderates in the parliament, and the clerical establishment to actually deliver a binding agreement.
Okay, so he's the guy who can herd the cats. He's the diplomat who can actually get things done internally.
Exactly. If there were ever to be a ceasefire, if the Trump administration decided the political clock had run out and they needed to declare victory and negotiate an exit, the U.S. would absolutely need someone exactly like Larijani on the other side of the table.
Someone to actually strike a deal with.
They need someone who can pick up the phone, negotiate the terms, and most importantly, deliver the rest of the Iranian military system to abide by those terms.
Okay, so this is where I am genuinely confused by the military logic being employed here. If you are the United States and your ultimate goal is to find a ceasefire eventually so you don't ruin your domestic economy and your election chances,
Right.
why on earth would you target and eliminate the only person who can actually pick up the phone and deliver the Iranian system? You're literally blowing up your own exit door.
It is a stunning contradiction. It seems utterly irrational until the analyst explains it by pointing out the deep fundamental divergence in goals between the United States and Israel in this specific conflict.
Explain that divergence, because they're allies, aren't they fighting for the same thing?
Tactically, yes. Strategically, no. We established that Trump wants a victory declaration. He wants an off-ramp, a clean exit, before the economic pain hits his voters and jeopardizes his presidency.
Right.
But Israel, according to the source, does not want an off-ramp. Israel wants the war to continue.
Oh, wow.
Their existential goal is the total, irreversible destruction of Iran's industrial and military capacity. From the Israeli perspective, killing a pragmatic consensus maker like Larijani makes perfect, reefless sense.
Because if you kill the diplomat, you remove the possibility of diplomacy.
Precisely. By targeting Larijani and figures like him, they are intentionally, or at the very least recklessly, killing the off-ramp. Israel is effectively locking the Trump administration into a war it increasingly wants out of by systematically eliminating the only Iranian officials who could conceivably negotiate that exit.
Wow. So by eliminating moderate voices or consensus builders, you guarantee that only the most hardened, uncompromising, militaristic factions of the IRGC remain in absolute control.
Exactly. You guarantee a fight to the death.
Which perfectly transitions us into the next phase of this strategy. Because if you are trying to collapse a regime by cutting off its political head, the assumption, the hope, is that the body of the nation will rebel.
Right, the internal uprising.
The entire U.S. strategy seemed to lean heavily on the idea that if you apply enough military and economic pressure, the Iranian people, or crucially the Iranian military, would turn against the government.
That was the explicit expectation. The source states that the U.S. planners anticipated mass defections within the military and security apparatus within the first 100 hours of the conflict.
And how many defections have actually happened?
Zero. Absolutely zero.
Why? I mean, I think if you are looking at this from the outside, you have to wonder. If a regime is under this much relentless bombardment, if the economy is crashing, if the leadership is being assassinated, why wouldn't generals or government officials jump ship? Why aren't there mass mutinies?
But understand this, we have to look coldly at the psychology of a defection, particularly within a deeply entrenched, paranoid security state like Iran's. A defection in this context is rarely a sudden moral awakening.
It's survival.
It is a brutal, calculated life or death risk assessment. A general or a high-ranking official will not defect unless they are absolutely, unequivocally convinced of two things.
What are they?
Number one, that their family will be physically safe from immediate, violent retribution by the regime loyalists. And number two, that they have a viable, secure, and respected future in the new political order that replaces the regime.
And the source material argues that the external opposition to the Iranian regime, the people trying to foment this revolution from the outside, has completely failed to provide those assurances.
They have failed spectacularly. The analyst specifically points to the external opposition movement led by Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah of Iran.
Okay.
Instead of doing the incredibly hard, pragmatic, secretive work of organizing a grassroots resistance inside Iran, uniting fractured opposition groups, and quietly offering amnesty and golden bridges to regime insiders to incentivize them to defect.
They did the exact opposite.
Yes, the loudest voices in the external opposition are publicly promising revenge. They are signaling that if the regime falls, there will be massive purges, tribunals, and executions for anyone associated with the current government.
That is just, my analogy for this is, it's like you are trying to get a crew to mutiny on a sinking ship. You desperately want them to turn on the captain and take control of the vessel. But you're shouting at them from a comfortable lifeboat saying, hey, if you help us overthrow the captain, we're going to throw you overboard anyway for having worked for him.
Right.
Of course, they're going to stay on the ship and try to patch the holes. You have given them absolutely zero incentive to leave.
That is a perfect analogy for the psychological dynamic at play. By promising revenge instead of amnesty, the opposition effectively forces the Iranian military and security apparatus to stay fiercely, desperately loyal to the regime.
It's the only way they survive.
Exactly. It ceases to be about ideology and becomes a matter of raw personal survival. They are pushed back into the same sinking boat, fighting infinitely harder because they firmly believe the alternative is their own execution at the hands of the opposition.
And the source also levels a pretty harsh critique at Pahlavi's overall strategy. Instead of focusing on building credibility on the Iranian streets or organizing labor strikes, his strategy seems to focus entirely on lobbying power centers in the United States.
Yes. The analyst notes the strategy appears focused on lobbying Trump at Mar-a-Lago, hoping to essentially be handpicked and installed as the new leader of Iran by the U.S. military.
Which demonstrates a fundamental, almost tragic misunderstanding of how revolutions actually succeed.
You can't just force it from the outside.
Right. You cannot parachute an exiled leader from Florida, backed by foreign bombers, and expect a deeply nationalistic, heavily armed security apparatus of hundreds of thousands of men to just lay down their weapons and salute.
It guarantees a bloody, protracted civil war, not a smooth democratic transition.
So let's look at where this leaves the military planners. The quick knockout failed. The economic war is hurting allies more than the enemy. The smart blockade is choking trade, the assassinations are destroying off-ramps, and the internal regime collapse isn't happening because defections are at zero.
It's a strategic dead end across the board.
When every single assumption fails, militaries are forced to improvise. And the source mentions they are considering some highly dangerous escalatory new tactics to break the stalemate, specifically putting U.S. ground troops on Karg Island.
This is where the tactical desperation starts to look incredibly perilous.
Yeah, explain Karg Island.
Karg Island is essentially the beating heart of the Iranian export economy. It's a small island in the Persian Gulf where roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports transition onto massive tankers.
90%. Wow.
Capturing it wouldn't just be a tactical victory, it would be an attempt to apply a devastating terminal economic chokehold on the regime.
But the analyst warns this is an incredibly dangerous escalation for the United States. Up until this point, a key factor in Trump's political survival in this conflict is that U.S. casualties are astonishingly low.
Right.
The source mentions maybe 8 to 10 total American deaths. Trump has successfully avoided the imagery of body bags coming home.
But a ground invasion of Karg Island changes that calculus entirely. You are suddenly abandoning the safety of high-altitude bombers and naval standoff weapons.
You're putting boots on the ground.
You're placing hundreds, perhaps thousands of American soldiers directly onto a static piece of land, just miles from the Iranian mainland.
You're handing Iran a stationary, target-rich environment.
Exactly. Those soldiers would be sitting ducks for the exact same swarms of short-range drones and ballistic missiles that have been battering the heavily defended Gulf states. You are inviting mass casualties.
Yeah, and they wouldn't even get the oil infrastructure intact, right?
Right. The analyst points out the scorched earth doctrine. Because Iran views this war as existential, they would likely destroy their own oil infrastructure on the island before letting the U.S. capture it intact.
They'd just blow it up.
They would blow the terminals, rendering the strategic value of capturing the island completely moot, while maximizing the combat chaos and environmental devastation.
It's a desperate, high-risk, low-reward move. Which brings us to the final, most terrifying phase of our analysis today. The extreme escalations and the tightrope the entire region is walking.
This is the really scary part.
We have established a terrifying mismatch in objectives. Trump wants a quick ceasefire to save his economy. Israel wants to prolong the war to destroy Iran's industrial base. And Iran wants to drag it out to inflict lasting, unforgettable pain so no one ever attempts this again.
Right.
When you have combatants with completely incompatible goals and rapidly ticking clocks, that paves the way for absolute desperation.
It paves the way for the unthinkable. And the source outlined exactly what those extreme, civilization-altering escalations look like from both sides.
Let's start with the U.S. side. The source notes that Trump has been actively avoiding striking Iranian oil facilities directly because he doesn't want global oil prices to spike and cause domestic inflation. But as desperation grows, the target lists are expanding. The administration is reportedly considering heavily arming internal ethnic militias within Iran to purposefully spark a full-blown civil war.
Which would be catastrophic on a scale that is hard to comprehend. Deliberately fracturing a highly diverse nation of over 90 million people into armed, warring ethnic and sectarian factions would create a black hole of instability.
It wouldn't just stay in Iran either.
Exactly. It would suck in the entire Middle East. It would make the Syrian civil war, which displaced millions and destabilized Europe, look like a localized skirmish. The refugee crisis alone would collapse neighboring economies.
And the Iranian escalations on the table are equally terrifying. The source mentions the explicit, credible threat of Iran striking GCC desalination plants.
We need to pause and truly understand the gravity of that threat, because the vulnerability of the Gulf states here cannot be overstated.
Explain how vital these plants are, because I don't think people realize.
Nations like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they exist in a hyper-arid environment. They have almost no natural, replenishable freshwater aquifers left.
No lakes, no rivers.
Right. They rely almost entirely on massive coastal reverse osmosis desalination plants to convert seawater into drinking water for their populations.
Wow.
These plants are enormous, complex, and incredibly fragile pieces of infrastructure sitting right on the coast.
So if Iran launches a precision drone swarm and permanently cripples those plants,
the major cities of the Gulf literally run out of water in a matter of days. It wouldn't just be an economic crisis, it would be a humanitarian catastrophe of unimaginable proportions.
Millions of people without water.
Millions of people facing death by dehydration in a desert climate. It would turn the wealthiest, most modernized part of the Middle East into an unlivable apocalyptic crisis zone overnight. That is the ultimate terrifying leverage Iran holds over its neighbors.
And then the source touches on the absolute extreme worst-case scenario. And honestly, just reading this part of the transcript gave me chills.
Yeah, this is where it gets really dark.
The analyst notes that there are serious high-level conversations suggesting Israel might consider using nuclear weapons, and that U.S. officials are not explicitly taking that option off the table in their internal planning.
When sober geopolitical analysts start talking about the nuclear threshold, not as a theoretical deterrent from the Cold War, but as an active, operational consideration to break a conventional military stalemate. The situation has spiraled entirely out of human control.
It's unimaginable.
It is the ultimate symptom of a war, where traditional, rational, strategic victories are proven impossible, leading to a dangerous embrace of apocalyptic force.
So how do the neighbors feel about all this? What is the view from the capitals of the Gulf Cooperation Council? The initial simplistic narrative we often hear in the West is that the Sunni Gulf states secretly wanted the U.S. and Israel to bomb Shia Iran to take care of their regional rival for them.
The source entirely refutes that simplistic idea. Yes. The analyst states clearly that the Gulf nations largely blame the United States for initiating this specific conflict in this manner. And crucially, they emphatically do not want the U.S. to finish the job and destroy the Iranian state completely.
Which seems counterintuitive at first glance. If you view Iran as your main geopolitical and religious rival, why wouldn't Saudi Arabia want them destroyed?
Because of the permanence of geography. The GCC leadership is highly pragmatic. They realize that governments change, alliances shift, American presidents come and go, but geography is permanent. As the analyst says, they have to live next door to Iran forever.
Right.
If the U.S. completely destroys the Iranian state infrastructure, collapsing the society into warlordism or civil war, the Gulf countries will be forced to live next to a volatile, deeply vengeful, permanently destabilized nation of 90 million people.
And all that anger has to go somewhere.
The ire, the radicalization, and the violence of a destroyed Iran would be directed squarely across the Persian Gulf.
Right. It's like if you cheer while your heavily armed neighbor's house burns down, you still have to live next to the smoking ruins and the incredibly angry, desperate family that survived the fire.
Exactly. And furthermore, the GCC realizes that the United States is an increasingly unreliable partner. Their alliance with Washington is shakier than ever, dictated by domestic U.S. election cycles rather than grand strategy.
Because the U.S. can just leave.
The U.S. military might drop bombs, declare a victory, and fly their aircraft carriers home, but the Gulf states cannot fly home. They have to stay and deal with the radioactive geopolitical fallout for the next century.
Which leads to a really profound point the expert in the source makes regarding the true outcome of this kind of warfare. War favors hawks, not doves.
Always.
If you bomb a country to smithereens, if you destroy their economy and assassinate their pragmatic leaders, you don't magically pave the way for a liberal democracy to blossom from the craters.
You do the exact opposite. Extreme pressure creates extreme states. You empower the most authoritarian, militaristic, and paranoid factions within that society because in a state of total war, only the ruthless survive.
Wow.
You guarantee that the future of that nation will be defined entirely by a security apparatus obsessed with vengeance and survival.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. Let's do a quick recap of the incredible, sobering mechanics we've unpacked from this deep dive into the source material. We started by dismantling the hubris of the 100-Hour War, revealing how a plan for a quick, sterile, tactical victory has devolved into a grueling, bloody, strategic endurance test that the architects were not prepared for.
We examined the invisible ticking clock, highlighting how the 14% GDP contractions in the Gulf and the domestic political realities in the U.S. create a massive vulnerability that Iran, fighting a war for its absolute survival, simply does not share.
We looked at the sheer, calculating danger of Iran's smart blockade, using the threat of maritime insurance premiums and anti-ship missiles to act as a bouncer for global trade, fragmenting U.S. alliances in the process. We unpacked the bizarre, self-defeating paradox of the U.S. and Israel targeting consensus makers like Ali Larijani, essentially assassinating the very diplomats needed to build an exit strategy.
And we explored the deep psychological failure of the external opposition, who, by promising purges and revenge instead of amnesty and safety, have guaranteed zero military defections, forcing the Iranian security state to fight fiercely to the bitter end.
It is a breathtakingly complex, precarious situation where every assumption has failed and the consequences of those failures are rippling across the globe. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. Think about the ultimate tragic paradox revealed in the analysis today. The stated goal for some involved in this conflict is to neutralize a threat, to bring stability to the Middle East, and potentially to bring about a friendlier, democratic Iran. But as the analysis pointed out so clearly, you do not build a vibrant democracy from the ashes of a completely decimated industrial base. You do not foster human rights by starving a population and empowering its most paranoid hardliners. So consider this. When a military strategy focuses solely on the total destruction of the enemy's capacity to exist, does the blind pursuit of absolute victory inherently destroy the very future you are fighting to create? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives you are handed, look beyond the tactical headlines to the strategic reality, and we will see you next time.